really excited for this. I think it's a great opportunity to learn more about WasteLess and also to learn and explore connections across the world. Before we get into the fun stuff, I'll just introduce AVI USA for those of you who are not familiar. Auroville International USA is a nonprofit organization based here in the US that works to expand the global impact of projects connected to Auroville. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Auroville, it's a fascinating 56-year-old collective spiritual experiment with a focus on human unity. Over 3,000 people from dozens of nationalities live in Auroville, exploring the evolution of human consciousness, governance and community building systems, ecosystem generation, and lots more. Auroville International USA provides Auroville projects with funding, training, partnership opportunities to help them reach out and increase their positive contributions to the world. And one of AVI USA's premier partner projects is WasteLess, which was founded by Chandrah and Ribhu. And after doing various waste awareness projects in South India from like 2004 to 2012, including developing an amazing trash and show where people used waste products to create amazing functional clothing and started their stuff on the runway. They started developing curricula for local schools, and their work eventually got national attention and started being incorporated into textbooks. They've always focused on practical solutions and listening to the teachers and kids that are using the curricula to constantly refine and improve their materials and ensure they have the highest possible impact. In 2023, they received support from the National Geographic Society for an initiative called SeaChange that taught students about the impacts of microplastics and how to mediate them. Chandrah has a background in psychology, anthropology, and educational sciences, and a passion to create experiences that invite curiosity and positive impact. And her guiding strong belief is that little drops make a mighty ocean. And that belief is reflected in the amazing work that she does at WasteLess. And Ribhu's background is in innovative communication and hospitality management. And he, according to the WasteLess website, masters the captivating art of pester power. So we might have to ask him a little bit more about that later on. The website goes on to say that he takes everyone in his sphere on a journey that leaves one inspired and ready to join him, making the impossible possible. And we're also, as Yana mentioned, joined by our special guest, Jon Bowermaster. John's a writer, filmmaker, adventurer, 6-time grantee of the National Geographic Expeditions Council. He's written 11 books and produced and directed more than 30 documentary films. He's also the president of the One Ocean Media Foundation, chairman of the advisory board of Adventure Science, and creative affiliate of the Safina Center. For the past several years, John and his One Ocean Media Foundation, Ocean 8 Films team have focused on a series of short films about the environmental risks to and hopes for the Hudson River Valley, the birthplace of the American environmental movement. And we're gonna see some clips and learn a bit about that work today. John's also a visiting lecturer at Bard College, where he supports students to develop their own projects related to clean water. And he has a weekly radio shows podcast called the Green Radio Hour with Jon Bowermaster. And we'll put a link in the chat. It's radiokingston.org. So those are our exciting guests. We're going to lead off today with a clip before we get into the conversation. This first clip is called, I don't know what it's called, but it was made for the SeaChange project by Nefertiti Chakravarti. She created the clip to help WasteLess share the SeaChange curriculum with government officials and partner NGOs in India. SeaChange is an innovative educational program about microplastics in the ocean, created by WasteLess and funded in part by the National Geographic Society. So this clip just introduces the project, and we'll give a general picture of that work. So we can go ahead and cue that up. There we go.
Rests in each heartbeat you feel and each laugh that you hear. Growth can be uncomfortable, but with it comes strength and resilience. Cycles and circles. If we contain the desire to understand this planet we call ours, then perhaps we can see change.
I realized that the reason the film was not ready is because I jumped the gun. It's all good. We are gonna now bring in our special guest. I don't know where Ribhu went, but Yana, if you can find him and spotlight him, that would be great. We are excited and happy and grateful to welcome Chandrah and Ribhu. And if you guys want to just add to my brief introduction and share a little bit about your work and what you've been working on and what you are looking forward to in the future, just to get us going here, that would be great.
Yes, so I think, hi, my name is Chandrah, and I grew up in Auroville in South India. And together with my brother Ribhu, who's right below me in my screen anyway, my younger brother, we started the organization called WasteLess. And I think how we started was actually to be inspired by children. We started with litter cleanups. We had a massive litter-free Auroville campaign in 2010 in Auroville, and that really sparked and ignited us in focusing on children. It was amazing to see the reaction of children after this campaign and the pester power that they had with their parents. So they did a really small litter cleanup. We had an exhibition with information, and we had a trashing show where designers and anyone who wanted to could design outfits made out of waste. And it really put waste back on the map in our little village in Auroville, which was wonderful to see. And a lot of new projects came out of that. But I think for us, what was the most inspiring was children and how it impacted them and how they went home and pestered their parents to change something in their homes. So you had children stopping parents to pick up litter on the road. They wanted to, every time they went shopping, they wouldn't take a plastic bag. They hassled their parents to always use a reusable bag. So just this one-off little campaign actually sparked this amazing change in children. And I think for us, that was eye-opening. And that really started the journey for WasteLess and the development of our first curriculum that we launched in Auroville itself.
Yeah, it was incredible. Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many familiar faces. It's incredible to be here with Matthew and with you, John. And I think as a storyteller and an environmentalist, we see that there's such a need for talking about these issues, and they're right in our face. I think when we started Litter Free Auroville, and I remember my big sister would pester me and say, you know, what are you doing with your life? I was working for the oil industry before and had lots of savings and came to Auroville in my mid-20s and would have like 1 or 2 meetings a day and trying to look for what I wanted to do. And Chandrah would tell me, you know, you're being useless, do something good with your life, come and help me. And she was trying to put waste on the map. And you could see that there was a problem everywhere. There was plastic. So we responded to that with garbology and later educational programs. And we're really excited now because we just started a new project on freshwater. So we're right now in the middle of our at the end of our first year of research in a curriculum about our freshwater crisis. So yeah, it's wonderful to be here, and yeah, so inspiring to be able to do this work and try to bridge this gap between some of the biggest problems on the planet, like plastic pollution and now freshwater and climate change, and how students feel in a classroom. It's really wonderful to be here, and wonderful to be here with John, you have such incredible storytelling, and Chandrah and I have been enjoying watching all your films on Vimeo. So it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And John, how about a little additional intro from yourself? Anything that you want to expand on that I mentioned?
As Ribhu was explaining, I thought of a couple things. One is I write those bios and I hear them read back to me, and I thought that guy must be really old. There's lots going on. But the one thing you said that is kind of unusual in any kind of environmental storytelling is that you actually had a savings at one point.
That's only because I sold my soul for 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you don't find too many environmentalists leading with that story.
I'll keep it in mind. I'll keep it off the next Zoom call section.
Well, I love the clip from your film. I mean, it's a reminder that, you know, a couple things. You don't have to travel halfway around the world to find good environmental stories. They're right outside your back door. And we're all facing the same issues. You know, our concerns here in the Hudson Valley are almost exactly the same concerns that you have in Auroville when it comes to environmental issues. But yeah, thanks for having me, Yona, Matthew, Chandrah, Ribhu. Shout out to our friend Julian Lyons for the invitation. And yeah, I feel pretty lucky because I have always known since I was 15 or so what I wanted to do, which was to write. And how the interest in environmentalism in remote corners of the world came about. I grew up in the heart of the United States. I was literally born in Normal, Illinois, right dead center, far from the ocean, etc. But I was a voracious reader. So teachers always liked my stories because I got turned on by, excited by the world through books. And that morphed into that desire to write, and that desire to know the world led to, you know, I hate to admit it, but 45 plus years of environmental storytelling, because though the mediums have changed, you know, I've written for many, many magazines, I've written books, I've made films, I've do the radio show and the podcast. I mean, every medium as journalism evolves, I've kind of ridden the wave. So, but the one constant is that in the background are always environmental stories. I started a weekly newspaper when I was 23, did that for 5 years. And when I go back and look at those archives, I'm happily impressed by how many environmental stories we were doing. This was 1977 and 1982, a little bit before you guys were born. So the fact that we were writing about environmental issues at that time is good for me. You know, that again, we started that in 1977. The first time that the American public really heard about climate change and global warming wasn't until 1988. So, you know, it's and to a certain degree, all of the issues are very serious and have been around for a while. It's somewhat young problems that we're dealing with. The one thing that kind of unites my work these days, though, is this desire to find new ways to tell environmental stories. I think we've gotten a little repetitious. You know, we turn the page of a newspaper, we see an environmental story or environmental headline in the newspaper. We glance at the headline, we turn the page, we think, oh, we've seen that story before. Same with video. You know, we start watching a film about microplastics or about sea level rise, and we, you know, too quickly, whether we're scrolling or paging through something, we get, you know, numbed into a feeling of I've heard this story before. So one of my goals has been for the last dozen years at least, is to find new ways to tell environmental stories. I do it myself in my own work, whether it's using adventure or music or other means to draw people into a story. You know, my big project for National Geographic was 10 years long, and we traveled around the world one continent at a time by sea kayak. And each of the trips involved sea kayaking, but it also involved an environmental story on each continent. We went to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. We went to the coast of Vietnam, the Tuamotus in Polynesia, Gabon, Tasmania, the high altiplano of South America, Croatia, Antarctica, etc. But the mission always was to use the adventure. So when those television programs ran on the TV, people would see kayaks in these obscure places like the high altiplano of South America or along the peninsula of Antarctica, and they'd say, whoa, I'm gonna stop and check this out. But the story was about how environmental issues are linking these places. And now I've morphed a little bit. You mentioned the Bard College connection. I live just 12 minutes away from campus. It's very convenient. And since 2019, I've been teaching a class there called Multimedia Environmental Storytelling for college students. And the goal is to find new ways to tell environmental stories at a time when, like what you guys are doing in Auroville, at a time when people are kind of getting a little bit numb to, you know, microplastics, schmicroplastics, and people feeling like they know that story, but we need to find new ways to tell them, because if we don't, these issues will overtake. I'm not sure if we're going to show some clips, or I'll leave it up to you guys.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. That was really useful. And actually, I'm going to just jump off from that, because you've all worked in different ways on helping youth and adults understand the impact of plastic pollution in the oceans and rivers, and orienting people to practical solutions. So I'd love to hear from each of you. John, you talked a little bit in general way, but like, how have you tried to educate people so they feel empowered and inspired versus just feeling overwhelmed by the problems? And Chandrah and Ribhu, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? So I think we're at WasteLess, we're always trying to find innovative ways of creating these tangible experiences through education. The idea is to inspire and empower children to become agents of change, right, within their own homes, but also, of course, within their own communities. And I think, like John was saying, when it comes to environmental issues or even environmental education, I think these these problems like plastic pollution and climate change are so overwhelming that we need to find a way to relate to children when it comes to education, because we primarily focus on 1st through 8th grade when it comes to education. And so what we're really looking at when we talk about education is how can we actually focus on the latest science, right? Find out what is actually going on in the world today when it comes to scientific research, and really bridging the gap between that and a child's home, their classroom, a setting. And so we connect the science and make learning about the global challenges something that children enjoy. Children need to enjoy learning. Otherwise, it doesn't actually resonate with them. And so I think what we have learned over these years is also this concept of how can we tell a story that children can actually relate to? And we try to connect to them. And then the idea is that then they can take action, right? When it comes to a certain issue. And the materials that we create are really driven by the interest of children, so that this sparks this curiosity. These classroom experiences have to light something within them, so deep within their hearts, and not just at a superficial level. And what we've realized is that when our programs are integrated within a curriculum, so when you have this regular engagement with these programs, then you see this massive change within children. And they don't only change one small thing, right? From, let's say, a plastic water bottle or disposable water bottles to their own reusable water bottle, but they really carry it with them throughout their entire lives. It's something that they cannot help. What we like to say is they sort of get bitten by this bug, and they look at everything within their lives and they want to change things within their lives. And it comes from within them. It's not that we're telling them to do something, but it really, they're inspired and they want to change something. So I think that's something that we have realized over the years. And another aspect I think that guides us is to really do this in-depth research, to not only understand the latest science, but we have to understand where a child is coming from. We work with children from low-income schools. We work with children from high-income schools. They live in completely different realities. And you can't expect all children, you can't touch all children in the same way. So we really try and create these educational experiences looking at children. So we have these focus group discussions with children, and we really try and understand, what do they know? What do they think? How do they feel about issues such as plastic pollution? And what is their relationship with plastic? And that is a starting point whereby when we look at the science, we look at a child's mind and their perspective and their experience, then we sort of join these two. So what we try to do is, just like a piece of Velcro where you have these two different sides, we search for new ways to connect the latest science with a student's life. And this creates this experience that they can relate to. Sorry, I'm rambling on, so I think I'm going to stop right here.
I wouldn't call it rambling. It's really fascinating.
Okay.
I think what you're highlighting is the need for, I mean, you're talking about science and the cutting edge science and being relevant, but also like the need for it to come from within. And I think about with kids especially, right. You know, if I tell my kids to do something and they're not motivated, the response is much different than if it can, you know, if I can somehow insinuate that it was their idea, if I can plant some seed that can grow out of them. And I'd love to hear, Ribhu, if you have anything to add, like on a practical, like nuts and bolts, like how do you do that? What are your strategies for doing that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I love this kind of challenge that we have, like Chandrah was saying, these two pieces of Velcro. So we were chatting to one of the top marine plastic pollution scientists just during COVID, and she was Australian. She was telling us that fish get duped. They get fooled into eating microplastic because the microplastic gets covered by an algae coating, just like a pebble in a pond, right? So it gets covered in this algae, and the algae releases a smell, a chemical Q called DMS that attracts fish, and it's exactly the same as plankton. So fish eat microplastic by accident. They're actually attracted to it. And so Chani and I were thinking, and the whole team at WasteLess, how do we give that feeling of being tricked? And so we went out back to students, like Chandrah was saying, we're looking at this piece of the Velcro first, the students, and we asked them what games they like, and they all love tag. This is something they play, and like, you know, lunch break and snack breaks, they would play tag. These are low-income government schools, so we decided to do tag with a twist. We asked for some of the children to be, who wants to, be the person that catches the fish, and usually it's the fastest children, like a boy and a really fast girl, and they have to then tap the shoulder of other students within a boundary and try to eat as much food as possible. And there's a little catch to it, is that we distribute plankton and microplastic cards, and we kind of stack the game. So there's more microplastic than plankton in this game. Not very scientifically correct. But what happens is that they play tag, the fastest kids will always catch the most food, and the teacher takes them back into the classroom, and there's a round of applause for the person with the most tokens, these little cards that we give out. And then the students realize they're different colors. And I think in our game, they're pink and blue. And then there's a recount. And usually the fastest person, because the game is stacked, ate the most microplastic. And there's like this, the pin drops. And they understand, like you were saying, Matthew, when children can kind of connect those dots and form that knowledge themselves, they're much more likely to respond to it. And so they feel duped. And it's exactly that feeling that the scientist was explaining about real life situations. So we're trying to connect it in a way that really children engage with. And it's not Ribhu or Chandrah or Jon or Matthew telling children fish eat plastic by accident because of the smell, like I just explained to you. It's them understanding this through a game, being emotionally upset. What, you didn't tell me the rules? Well, that's exactly what fish can't tell the difference between plankton and microplastic. But yeah, it's a journey. We're constantly learning. So it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you're talking not just about motivation, but about viscerality, like the visceral experience of what it's like to be a fish, and the emotional impact of like, oh no, I got tricked. We all know what that's, nobody likes to be tricked. So, offering kids that, it's like, as opposed to thinking about how can I cram a bunch of information into their heads, giving them a visceral experience. It's really amazing. And Jon, when I look at your films, I think there's probably a tie in there. I mean, when I look at, this Antarctica film that we're going to screen shortly, I mean, there's a viscerality, just watching, the music and the kind of being there, you bring us into the space. And so if you could just talk a little bit about like your approach to that, how to use inspiration and kind of this visceral experience of being in the space as a way of connecting people to the issues that you want to educate them about.
Yeah. Well, there's a big disconnect between practice and reality. It's easy for us to explain environmental issues, and I'm speaking now mostly about young people. You guys said you're mostly working with 1 through 8, and I'm mostly working with college students and high school seniors or 12th graders. And our classes start every day with the environmental news story of the day, to bring in and tell me where you found it, because I'm most interested from young people where they're getting their news today. And they rarely can define it as one source. I mean, when I was growing up, I would have said like the local newspaper and the New York Times or something. And now these kids, because they spend so much time on their phones, they're getting information, but they're not necessarily sure exactly where it's coming from, which is interesting, which makes it kind of tricky to figure out how to reach them, because you're not quite sure how to channel it. But the other thing is, we sometimes as green thinkers are a little highfalutin, a little distance from reality. I'll do classes and we'll have serious conversations about everything from microplastics to where our energy comes from. When you flip that switch, do you know where the electricity is coming from? But we'll have these very serious discussions, and then the next class they'll arrive in class with a giant plastic bag full of plastic bottles and drinks, and not really make that connection that it's related. In 1988 in 1990 I published a book called Saving the Earth, and it was look at 14 different issues, both their 15 different environmental issues, their cause, effect, and solutions. I get it out every Earth Day and page through it to see how we're doing. as adults, as young people. And I have to say, we're doing better, certainly in regard to environmental education, but we've got a long way to go, because the environmental concerns of 1990 are the same environmental concerns of today. We're making progress. We are better educated. But also I ask my students at the high school level, at least many of them come from middle-class families, and I ask them, how many of you have solar panels at your home or get energy from solar or wind? No hands. No hands. How many of your families have electric vehicles? No hands. No hands. That's a typical middle class experience in the United States. We sometimes forget that these things are not yet available to everybody. So there's a big. I think what you guys are doing, especially with kids, is so important. And I kind of think that what we're doing with our films and on other mediums is just good by staying on the issue. People often ask me where I find optimism in this work, and it's hard sometimes. But when you look around and you see the people who I often call accidental environmentalists, people who've stumbled into this work because they've got a pipeline, buried in their backyard, or there's an aquifer that's been poisoned by a PFAS or something, and they become just devoted 100%, 24/7 environmentalists, which was not their intent. They have other jobs, other lives, families, etc. Those accidental environmentalists are where I get optimism, similar to what you guys are up to.
Yeah, great. I think it'd be great to give people a little taste of your work, Jon. So we're gonna show this. I think the trailer from the film related to Antarctica.
That was the first
Antarctica on the Edge.
Yeah, it was the first 3D, the only 3D movie shot in Antarctica. Yeah. And
just so I'm clear, when was this film made? How long ago?
The film was shot in 2012. So, and it played in 3D theaters around the world. So if you go to the museum, the Science Museum, they'll ask if you want to see the 3D movie. It was one of those.
Okay, amazing.
We made 20, I think, a 23-minute version and a 40-minute version, because the teachers like the 23 minutes, because beyond that, the students start to get a little restless.
Whose idea was it to make an immersive 3D thing? Like, was that your idea, or where did that come from?
Well, I had made a previous film in Antarctica, and then I met a team of folks who specialized in 3D movies, who had always wanted to make a film in Antarctica, but the logistics, as you can imagine, are a little tricky. We had to sail down there on a 73-foot metal hulled sailboat. I made that 3D film. I probably wouldn't make another because the camera weighs about 250 pounds. So there is no such thing as spontaneity. You set up the camera on one side of the sailboat where the whales are, and the next thing, by the time the camera's ready, the whales have moved. But the 250-pound camera is not easy to. So anyway, it was laborious. We couldn't take the camera indoors on the sailboat for fear of condensation, so it lived outdoors on the deck. So every morning it would take 2 to 3 hours to get it set up and running, and because it's all digital and computer driven, etc. So, but beautiful. You have penguins hopping off the screen and running through the audience. You have melting icebergs and glaciers coming through the audience. So it was totally worth it. If you ever get a chance to see it in 3D, go for it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to use our imaginations today. But I just, what you're talking about, the labor of it all. It's one thing to think about like adventure, like being on an adventure in Antarctica, and any of us who have been on a kind of outdoor adventure can imagine just the already difficult, you got to deal with your food, and you got to deal with the cold, and you got to deal with, and then you've got a 250-pound camera to deal with also. It's just, and I just want to acknowledge seems like the only reason you had that 250-pound camera with you and did all that extra work was for people, was to offer that experience, to
share the story.
Yeah, so it's a service, and I just honor that aspect of it. So thank you on behalf of all of us who get to experience your work for doing that.
The message of that film is the same whether you see it in 2D or 3D.
Okay, great. So Jana, you can go ahead and cue that up.
So who wants to go?
Hold on.
Who wants to go to Antarctica, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so that was just the trailer for one. We're going to show a little bit of a clip also, just to dig in a little bit.
Join us as we travel to a storied land. Writer and filmmaker Jon Bowermaster's introduction to Antarctica in 1989.
Yeah, and bonus prize to whomever, other than my voice, bonus prize to whomever you can guess who the narrator was of that film. It's a woman. Just heard her at the beginning.
I wasn't listening closely enough, but maybe we can let people put it in the chat if they have an idea.
Remind me at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to it and see if anybody got it. I just want to quickly touch on adventure and beauty as a kind of inroad to promoting awareness of climate issues, because it's a unique approach. There's obviously a lot of different people taking different approaches. Was there a moment when it occurred to you to take that direction, or was it something that evolved over time?
Well, I learned about expeditions and all the related stuff that goes with them from that team of Antarctic explorers. Will Steger, the American, and Jean-Louis, the Frenchman, and there were 4 others from Japan, China, Russia, and the UK. I learned from them, really, and that's what we all do. We all have mentors, and I watched them put together an adventure that then drew attention to. The idea was very purposeful in that case, was that the treaty that governs Antarctica was being renegotiated at that time. It was going to be re-signed in 1990. So the goal was to draw attention to Antarctica at a time that the treaty that protects it, because it was going to be wide open to drilling for minerals in 1990. But the idea was to draw attention to it, remind people how important it was and the importance of leaving it alone and leaving it be. And the $12 million expedition did just that. And in the end, the signatories of the treaty that governs Antarctica, the only successful international treaty that governs a place in the world, was signed in 1990 and extends through 2042. So until 2042, there can be no drilling and no exploration for minerals in Antarctica. It'll have to be renegotiated, and who knows what our energy needs will be in 2042. Right now, it's easy to say, oh, well, we won't need more oil and natural gas, but who knows? Who knows? And Antarctica, remember, is a continent. There's land underneath it. It broke off from South Africa and South America, and all the minerals and precious minerals and energy that is in those countries is in the land underneath all that ice. So it's there, and maybe one day people will figure out how to go get it. But for the moment, it's protected.
Amazing, amazing. And there's like adventure and there's storytelling kind of woven together. And just to bring Chandrah and Ribhu into the conversation, you guys, storytelling is a huge part of the work that you all are doing. Can you talk about that? As you know, a trash and show is so tactile, right? It's like, let's take trash and like make something beautiful out of it and give people an experience. But then when you kind of make the leap into storytelling, it seems like that when you started doing curriculum development, that was a big part. So is there anything that you can share about that shift and like what prompted that for you all? So I
Yeah.
asked you both at the same time, and then you you have to negotiate who goes first. I leave it to you.
Yeah, I think can I go first, Johnny?
Sure, go for it.
I think what we saw when we started with garbology, we were just kind of parroting what, like John was talking about, these stories, microplastic, schmicroplastic, I think you mentioned, because they're just repeated so often. And what we were trying to do in creating that bridge between science and how a child feels, or a classroom, is we were just making the direct, most clear bridge, which is parroting what the scientists are talking about. There's so much microplastic in the environment, or garbage is a problem, climate change is an issue. And it falls on deaf ears because we kind of close off when we get bombarded with those stories, particularly because they're negative. And they're repeated so often. And we don't feel empowered. And it's really interesting for this latest program, SeaChange, the one where you saw the video and with the tag game that you saw on the drone. We had a big challenge, is that the content when we pilot test, so we test our lesson plans. Once we come up with something, we go into a classroom and let teachers unpack it. And what we saw is that when we translated it into Tamil, which is our provincial language here, there's two types of Tamil. There's a spoken and then a written Tamil. And the written Tamil is like what news readers read, and I have trouble understanding it. And it's not how people think. And so what we observed in these classrooms is that when the teacher was explaining the main aspects of science, all the students were kind of looking outside the window, fidgeting, and then they would paraphrase the content, like, this is how fish eat microplastic, and this is where you can find microplastic in spoken Tamil, and everyone got interested. And we realized that that switching on and off of attention for students was terrible. And so we had to kind of think of creative ways, and that's when we resorted back to, you know, John's craft, which is how do we create a story? And so we were forced to do that because the textbook corporation, we work with the government, said you cannot write in spoken Tamil. It's not allowed. There's no kind of standard. And I remember negotiating with the head of, I think he's the head of science at SCRT, Chinthayanel, and he was telling us that if you put it in a dialogue between, let's say, two drama characters, then you can have spoken Tamil. And so we decided to have the entire thing in a story form between the teacher turtle and a student starfish. So these two characters kind of talk about the problem, and it really connected with students. And we could do it in a way that they understood and thought in. Yeah.
Yeah, which suggests it's a really exciting time to be teaching these things to young people.
Absolutely. Absolutely, John. Especially here, I think in the States where you've been pioneering that work. So I think media and the students in the States and the environmental movement, which started in, you know, where you are from, has had more time to bring exposure to young minds. So someone who's 42, like my age, would have grown up with it. While the students here, especially with government school students, they haven't had that exposure because they aren't those storytellers in mass media or in media sharing those stories. And so it's quite new for them to hear about the issues and also to find, of course, now they hear about it in news and media and it's all negative, but they haven't had that period of their parents growing up with these environmental issues. So it's quite new for them. And so it's also exciting to kind of bridge that gap right now in this time.
You know, something I've thought about is the speed with which things transitioned in a place like South India from everything being biodegradable to ubiquitous plastic. And in the US, we had this Don't Be a Litter Bug campaign that ironically was, I think, paid for by the people who were making all the garbage because they wanted it to not be visible. Put it in a landfill, and then people will keep buying stuff that's single use because they won't see it everywhere. So anyway, that's a whole nother story, but the quick transition from you can just burn everything or bury it and it's fine to there's a real consequences to burning and burying plastic in this place. Yeah, could you just talk a little bit about what it's been like to bring education into a space that is just moving so quickly? Maybe Chandrah, we can pick on you this time.
Yeah, so I think that for us, when we started with these litter cleanups. And I think, as I said, that was really an eye-opening experience, because just then plastics became very mainstream in India, especially a lot of low-grade plastic packaging. And unfortunately, in especially rural India and smaller towns, there's no formal collection systems in place. So everybody has to actually take care of their own waste. What is really amazing in the Indian context is that most of the waste that gets recycled is through the informal sector in India, actually. So you have these waste pickers, you have scrap dealers, and even in the smallest village, you'll have somebody who will come around once a month and they'll buy your recyclable waste. And it's a barter system. So somebody might come with some pots, you give them your waste, you get a pot in return. So there are these systems in place, and even smaller villages have scrap dealers. And that's sort of how the recycling chain works in India. So that is really amazing. But what we are faced with is these low-grade plastics, right? Those materials that don't actually have a value, and they are becoming mainstream. You have, your different chip packets, you have these tiny little sachets, a one-time use for your shampoos and different things like that. So when we started, it was very overwhelming because we started with these cleanups, but as soon as you clean up an area, like we cleaned up our little town, it was wonderfully clean for a month, and then it was completely littered again. And we like to always use this analogy. It's like you left your home and you forgot to close the tap, and you come back from your long day and everything is flooded. Now, what's the first thing you would do? Would you switch off your tap, or would you pick up a mop and start mopping the floor? Now, most of us would obviously close the tap, right? There's this leaking water. We like to compare this to waste management, globally speaking. That is that most effort is spent into actually mopping better. That's waste collection, recycling, and recycling rates with plastic are exceptionally low. And then we try and recycle as much as possible, but we are not linking it to our consumption and our consumerism. So for us, that was a very important part of our educational programs, is how do we actually tackle it at the source, rather than talking about hiding it better, because we're all talking about hiding it better, but we have to really link it to our behavior, our consumerism, and our habits ultimately, right? Because if we know about something, it doesn't necessarily we change our habits. So that was something that I think for us was a very positive aspect. And that's what we instill in everything we do. Because the waste problem is so large, just like all these big problems. So there are different ways that we can intervene. And for us, we've chosen children and education because we're betting on the next generation. We feel that if we can change them and we can touch their hearts, then when they become adults, they will have this power to change the system, hopefully. And more people thinking in that line will create this community of people who actually want to change those policies, those rules, those regulations, hold companies accountable, right? For the products that they produce, ultimately.
Yeah, I went to a fishing like to the beach somewhere a few kilometers north of Auroville a few years ago and saw them bring in the catch. And it was like at least 25% trash, plastic packaging, water bottles, chip bags, like that. So the work that you're doing, I mean, it's so visible to people, especially living on the coast. It's not like a hidden problem. People can see it. And I imagine that there's both the kind of, like we talked about before, the overwhelming aspect of it, but also the hopefulness of being able, you can see the problem. So maybe there's a way of tackling it. I think what we're going to do is shift to this stop motion video that was created by Aishwarya Ashok for WasteLess, called Microplastic Mayhem. And just to give a sense of this creative interpretation of this problem, it's part of the SeaChange educational program for children. And the film was voted the favorite by 13,500 students from low-income government schools that completed the SeaChange program last year. Aishwarya shot the film with Play-Doh, so handmade art, the old school stop motion way. And every second of the film has between 12 and 25 individual photographs. So just some things to keep in mind as you're watching it. It's really impressive. So let's take a look at that and then we'll come back.
Our beautiful ocean covers more than 70% of the Earth, which means a large number of marine species live under the surface. From the massive blue whale, the largest mammal on Earth, to smaller creatures such as dolphins, fish, and even teeny tiny bacteria. The deep blue ocean binds them all together, making it a home unlike any other. Every member of the ocean family plays an equally important role. And sometimes the biggest help of all comes from the smallest of heroes. Meet plankton. These beings are so tiny that you need a microscope to see most of them. But did you know that plankton have superpowers? Let's have a look. These tiny little creatures supply us with almost half of the oxygen we need. Take 2 deep breaths with me. One of those breaths was made in the ocean, all thanks to plankton. They're also the base of the ocean's food chain, keeping everyone's belly full, including ours. But wait, now there's a new guy in town pretending to be plankton and slowly tricking all the fish and their friends. Microplastic. When large pieces of plastic are thrown into the ocean or carried in by rivers or rain, the rays of the sun, the wind, and the waves break them down into smaller pieces, called microplastic. Microplastics are tiny pieces of plastic that are less than 5 millimeters long, which means they range from the size of a grain of rice to an almost invisible dot. Microplastics are now found in every part of the ocean, including where plankton live. They begin to attract algae on their surface, slowly changing color, and sneakily begin to hide amongst the plankton. Algae also smells like plankton, causing the microplastic to have the exact same scent. Can you spot the difference? Neither can fish. The confused fish, unable to see the trickery of the microplastic, accidentally end up eating them. Microplastics act like magnets for all toxic chemicals that are dumped in the ocean. So the fish end up eating a little bit of poison with every bite. Pesky little microplastic. So what can we do to help our underwater friends? We can say no thank you to plastic we use just once, such as plastic bags and food wrappers. They might be used for only a few minutes to hours, but can exist in the environment for hundreds of years. So it all leads back to what we put in the ocean in the first place. Become a change maker and proudly share the magic of the ocean with all your friends. We know more about space than what's underneath the surface of our ocean. It's a universe of its own, filled with magical alien-like creatures we haven't even named yet. We owe it to the coming generations to keep the ocean clean, so that they can explore what we couldn't. Let's dream and create a thriving and healthy ocean for all living creatures. Healthy ocean, healthy us.
That was fantastic.
So,
That was
yeah,
fantastic.
so good.
How old is that young filmmaker?
I think
Sorry, I'm on mute. So she is 27, I think. I might be wrong, John.
Yeah, that was
But
great.
she did this awesome film about girls playing football in Chennai, and we saw it when we were looking for creative storytellers. And she'd filmed it kind of from like the calf height. So you saw these calves playing football, you didn't realize they were girls, and she just has creative storytelling. She's actually doing an incredible course. I met her last week. She's doing an incredible course in Budapest, in Lisbon, and Brussels. I think she's in Brussels now, learning to be a documentary filmmaker. So she wants to be like you, John. And I think she's an incredible storyteller.
I just got a great start.
Thank you. I'll tell her that. She'll be happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was there once, I had the opportunity to meet her when she was working on the project. So let's shift to hope, because as we've acknowledged a few times, there's a lot. Facing the problem can be challenging, but where do you all find hope in your work, in the broader ecological picture on the planet? What brings each of you hope?
Yeah, well, I mentioned it before. I find it in people who have, are working 24/7 on issues that affect them directly. That, and for any of my negativity regarding the subject, we are becoming more eco-conscious. We have laws and legislation now is here in New York and elsewhere in the United States that is very forward-looking. In New York State, there's a law that says we have to be off of fossil fuels by 2030. Whether it'll happen or not is uncertain, but we're trying. We are. So there is optimistic stuff going on for sure. And I think just the fact that I do what I do and you guys do what you do suggests that there is plenty of room for others to jump in and participate and teach, instruct, guide, etc.
How about you, Chandrah?
I think for me, what really inspires me, it brings hope is when we sit in the back of a classroom, when we're pilot testing our educational programs. And as Ribhu said, when you're sitting in the back of a classroom and you're watching this teacher unpack this program. So they're unpacking this program, they're the experts in teaching. And the way they use the material, and they often put a spin, right, on the program. So they might change it up so that students understand it better. And when you see a teacher unpacking it and you look at a child and you can really see when the pin drops and they get it, there's a sparkle in their eye, there's a glint in their eye. I think that for me is one of those moments where I think, aha, we've got it. We have touched their hearts, we've strummed their heartstrings, we've made them curious, they're having a good time. This is going to translate into them becoming those agents of change. Like they've been touched, that's going to touch them for their lives. And they're going to continue doing something positive in their lives, whether they become politicians, whether they try and change a policy, whether they go home and change one thing or in their own lives, you can see this positive outcome. And so for me, that really, I think, gives me the energy to keep going and to keep plowing at it, because it's this upstream river that we're swimming against. And that just keeps us going, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to
Go
agree
ahead,
with
Ribhu.
Chandrah completely. Like, you can see them smile and the sparkle in their eye and that compulsion to want to do something. And this is what I think different between talking to adults and children, is that children have this automatic wish to immediately do something. And I still remember when you saw it in I think the first film. Marcus Ericsson is this incredible scientist in the US. He runs Five Gyres. He's a super inspiration to me. And we interviewed him to make SeaChange. And I was trying to tell him that, we have class sizes of about 50 for one teacher. There's no money to take them on field trips. This is what he was suggesting, take them to the ocean. So he said, give them an experience. Let them filter something with microbeads. And I think we have like face wash in the back there. So we tried everything, and you saw it in the film. They kind of filter out this face wash and they can feel microbeads. And I still remember with Chandrah, when we were pilot testing it in 4 schools, all the students came back to us and said what they did is they went home and they filtered everything they could, like mom's conditioner filtered and dishwash filtered. And they told us, look, we weren't sure how to find microbeads. Where can we find them? And they immediately did that experiment and they talked to their parents about it. And this just gave me so much hope and joy because they want to implement it. And I think, echoing what Jon said, I think we're seeing more environmentalists. When we started WasteLess in 2011, and we started talking about waste and plastic, people were like, yeah, interesting, but not for our school. And we were knocking on doors. We have some of I think a big shout out to Arpita Reddy and Nirmala here on the chat. I saw them. They were our first school in Chennai to do the program. And now we have 38,000 schools. And it's fantastic because more and more people recognize this as an issue, and they recognize that we need to educate children to rise up and tackle some of these huge global issues. So we're seeing more environmentalists there, more stories coming out, and yeah, it's exciting to be here in this time. And I think also something you said is that, Matthew, we've witnessed this extreme increase in consumption in a short period of time. So the US might have introduced plastic like post-Second World War. I think 1955 had that Time article where, you can have this throwaway living. The housewife doesn't have to do dishes because everything can be plastic. And so it gradually increased till today. And what we had in India was like no plastic until I think I was like, must have been 9 or 10, I think, early 90s, and then a sudden increase. And so that period was very short. And so what we see is that parents and grandparents know a life without plastic. And so I think we can leapfrog that phase in development if we can get the right policies, like Jon was talking about, in place. Then we can leapfrog that whole development. And 1 billion, 1.36 billion people that live in this country don't have to follow the same development trajectory. We can just jump to more sustainable living and better policies. And yeah, it's a really exciting time to be doing this work.
I don't want to forgive the insidiousness of the fossil fuel industry, though.
No,
they're still out there. I mean, we have a horrible story here in the United States. I imagine it's being repeated in India, where our demand for oil has lessened as we start to use more renewables, which is a good thing. But they're still pumping oil out of the ground in the Mideast, and they're looking for new markets. So they've gone into partnership with, this is the big Saudi Arabian energy company, oil company. They've gone into partnership with American energy companies like Exxon and Mobil and stuff to build factories, plants in the United States to ship this oil to from the Mideast, to not to put into cars and machinery, but to make more plastic. And then where's that plastic going? China. And then where is it going from China? Back to the United States. So we're, for all the good news, there still is lots of work to be done. Matthew, were we going to talk about hope? Because I'll interject. I'll jump in with a little hope if you'd like.
Yeah, please. I think if you can share something, and then we'll show a little clip from Hope on the Hudson.
Yeah. Well, about a dozen years ago, I I'm going to say purposely, but it wasn't that purposeful. It was kind of by accident. I started making films here in our own backyard in the Hudson River, the Hudson Valley, which Ribhu, you mentioned, or someone mentioned that the Hudson River Valley was the birthplace of the American environmental movement. I say all the time that there are more environmentalists per capita here in the Hudson Valley than anywhere else in the country, even though I have absolutely no empirical data to back that up. But so there's a great environmental ethic here. But when I decided to make local films or films in our backyard, I started with the kind of classic risk stories. We started a series called The Hudson, a River at Risk, and looked at PCBs in the river and the fact we had a leaky nuclear power plant on the river, and that the commercial fishing was gone because of pollution, et cetera. And we made beautiful films, very important. But I took them around New York State and I showed them, and I got bummed out. Because I thought, why am I just taking these stories of negativity and bad news around? So we pivoted purposely and started a series called Hope on the Hudson. I think we've made now almost a dozen films in that series. And they're short films, but short ranges from 7 minutes to 40 minutes. We've done some farm-related films to show how to try and answer the question, can wildlife and agriculture coexist? We made a really beautiful film last summer or a couple of years ago called Wind Shipped, about efforts to move goods up and down the Hudson River by sail and wind, and the wind and sun, and not by using fossil fuels, et cetera. Very kind of optimistic story. So that's been good. It's been good for the audiences. It's been good for me personally. And so we're still out there now. So I think you guys picked maybe a clip from one of the Hope on the Hudson films. So we'll talk.
Yeah. Let's get a taste.
Yeah.
I started patrolling in 2000, and there's no manual for how to protect a river. So we evolved a patrol, but we also were looking for ways to help the river. The question I kept getting from the public was, how's the water? How's the water? Nobody knew what the water quality in the Hudson was, and we wanted to know. As I started thinking about how to work for this river, you can't help a river without the public buying in. You can't do it. And, it just dawned on me that if we started sampling water quality for swimming, we would engage a large public, and the hope was that that public would then become interested in all the other things the river needs us to think about on its behalf. And so it was a mechanism.
One of the early findings was that the tributaries, these little beautiful creeks that reach the Hudson, which look gorgeous, are often more highly contaminated than the big muddy Hudson with the bad reputation. And that's what really led us into this citizen science work, to build out these teams to be able to measure water quality on a whole creek or a whole river in a single day and really get a snapshot of what that water quality is like. Our program is focused on looking at indicators for sewage pollution, but really what we have is a platform for science, and that's 170 people going out across 800 plus miles of water every month to grab a sample, over 440 samples per month. That gives an unprecedented scope, unprecedented geographic range at an unprecedentedly kind of small price because you're using citizen scientists to gather that data.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I haven't watched that for a while, but we're going to talk about what's next. And we've been working with that same team for 3 years on a film about kind of updating the status of the health of the river.
Amazing, amazing. Leveraging just, people with goodwill. And as you said, in a place where there's a lot of them, bringing them
Well,
together.
and
to do some
the
good
Riverkeeper organization is really impressive. It started in the 1960s. It was started by fishermen who were concerned about why there were fewer fish and why there were contaminated fish, and went from there. And there are now 350 groups around the world that have taken their cues from the Hudson River Riverkeeper, and they're bay keepers and gulf keepers, and they again, from that one example, they all operate under the banner of the Waterkeeper Alliance. I'm sure, I can't quote them. I'm sure there are several in India. You guys probably know them.
That's so incredible. I don't know of any, John, but I think I love that idea of citizen science and people involved in collecting that data, because they'd be so much more inclined to kind of, like the fishermen that started it, to do something about the problem and push legislation to change. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and when they first, because they kept being asked, how's the water? Well, how's the quality of the water? And they would shrug their shoulders and say, we don't know. And they assumed that someone at the state must monitor water quality. And they were shocked to learn that, in fact, no one was testing water quality. So they started it. And as it's mentioned in that clip, and now they have 170 volunteers who help them on a monthly basis. And all that material is very accessible. You can go online and find out. So it's good. We still have issues of contamination in the Hudson River, so it's not by any means it's not a solved issue or something we can move past, but there's a lot going on. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that when we pay attention to something, when we measure something, it's in our awareness, and it's not in the kind of unconscious domain. We have to look at it. And it also occurs to me that WasteLess has 13,500 potential volunteers, or maybe 100,000 potential volunteers throughout Tamil Nadu that could maybe, bringing that level of engagement with science is really a fascinating idea. So
yeah,
not to pin anything on you guys, but John, you alluded to talking about what's next. We're just going to take the last little bit of time that we have together here to hear from each of you about what's next with your work. So John, if you want to start.
Sure. Before I jump into the what's next, I did wanted to shout out to Ribhu regarding that one. He said two interesting things. One about the once upon a time having a savings, and now mentioned that figure of 1.36 billion, which is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. That's the population of India today, correct?
That is, yeah. I mean, it's probably more today. That was when it was last studied. So.
Yeah, but because here in the States, I often ask, what's it going to take? Because I think that one of the most important things going forward is green leadership. you know, in our governments, in our agencies, et cetera. And I question all the time, what's it going to take for our leaders to be instinctually green? I made a series of films, what I call my Dear series. Dear Governor Cuomo, Dear President Obama, Dear Governor Brown, Dear President Biden, asking these leaders, you know, kind of holding their feet to the fire a little bit in a positive way, you know, to become more green. But I think greenness, green thinking, green leadership, green laws needs to be instinctual. You know, you have to do it automatically. You can't take a poll to find out if, you know, passing legislation to slow climate change is important or not. You act on it. You know, Joe Biden was elected saying that you know, that climate change was an existential problem, and he said everything he did would be with climate change in mind, and he's done actually a pretty good job. What's next is we are doing a profile of that guy that you saw in that clip, John Lipscomb. We've been working on that for several years. He's been patrolling the Hudson River for almost 25 years. So he's a great raconteur. And then the other bigger film we're doing is looking at how communities up and down the river are dealing with climate change or preparing for climate change. You know, smaller communities upriver do simple things like, because it's an unusual time. We're trying to encourage people to access the river and use the river, and at the same time we're telling them, whoa, stay back, don't get too close because the sea levels are rising. But you know, in New York City, the plans to protect Manhattan mostly, you know, cost, you know, $100+ billion. So it's not something you take lightly. These are things that take decades. They're things that by the time you decide what you're going to do, by the time you get around to actually starting it, the plans have all changed. You have to start over again. So that film will look at how smaller communities are preparing, and how New York City, the biggest metropolis in the United States, is preparing for the inevitable, because sea level's coming. You know, we have issue here. I don't know. I'm having been on some trains in India, I'm sure you have the same issue. But you know, now as the sea level comes up and the Hudson River is right next to the train lines, there are many mornings when people turn on the radio or they turn on the internet and to see if the trains are running, to see if the tracks are flooded. You know, it's just happening more and more frequently. So it's not just an ethereal thing. It's something that's happening on a daily basis and already impacting you. And that's the most important thing to know about climate change. Is it's not something that's down the road or in the future. It's surrounding us now.
Yeah, well, we will keep an eye out for your upcoming work. And Jana, if you could post again the links to John's work in the chat for anybody that joined late and didn't see the original links, that would be great. So we can follow along and stay inspired and informed by your work.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the Hudson River Stories, HudsonRiverStories.com. There's 20+ films. They're all free. Just you can click on them and enjoy, I hope.
Yeah, these websites are amazing because everything's just there. There's just you could spend hours watching amazing videos, and they're all very high quality, beautiful, really well done. So Chandrah and Ribhu, what's next for you?
So one thing that we would really like to focus on these coming years, I think that's something that we want to continue to scale our educational programs. So it's reaching more than 3.9 million students, which we have now. And that latest SeaChange program that you had seen, you know, the stop animation. So that's something that we, for the first time, developed for Tamil-speaking, lower-income government school students in Tamil Nadu. So it was, when we launched it with these 13,500 students, it was students from these types of schools. But the idea for this program was to also have it in English and in Hindi so that we can actually spread it throughout the country of India. And we would like to do this through different organizations, but also working with the educational ministries. So we had a partnership with the state government education department in Tamil Nadu, and it was wonderful to get the best practices and learnings from another curriculum into the state books. So this is the approach and strategy that we have, is to work with the different ministries and try and integrate these key learnings into also state and hopefully national curriculums. So that's one of the plans. And maybe Ribhu can touch upon our latest project that we're working on now.
Yeah, I think Thanks, Johnny. The scaling is very important, and we're always looking for experiences or our environment telling us what we should educate children about. And fresh water is a big, big issue. John, you mentioned 1.36 billion. That number jumped out at you. And we have so many people living in this small landmass in India, and lots of them living in cities. And with fresh water, we're seeing that the highest at risk of water scarcity are Indians and Chinese living in big urban centers. And so we see that fresh water is a huge upcoming challenge. And we've just spent the last year speaking to experts all around the world, lots of them in the States, poring over peer-reviewed papers. And we're right now framing the curriculum. So what are we going to talk to children about with fresh water? And we start developing the curriculum. And ultimately, what we want to do is keep this methodology of kind of co-design in learning materials with scientists and with students and teachers, and keep going. And ultimately, I loved what you said about leaders being instinctively green, because this is what we want the response to be from all our students, right? We want the first, like the default thinking to be, how can I reduce my waste? How can I close the tap? How can I save water? And the hope is that through partnerships, so it's not just WasteLess or us in a small way doing this in South India, but through partnerships, we learn interesting ways to tell the story about these global issues differently and then spread those methods around the world. And the hope is that we reach 15 million students in the next 5 years. It's a bit ambitious, but we're really pushing through partnerships like SeaChange, the stop motion film you just saw, the tag game. They've got integrated into Center for Wildlife Studies. It's a huge NGO working with 300,000 students around the wildlife parks. And that's starting this month in August. So we work with them on a plastics module, and they're going to launch it this month. And we hope to continue these partnerships, working with National Geographic Learning, and a textbook is coming out later this year. So the hope is that we can continue speaking to amazing people and sharing what we love doing and inspiring more young minds, and hopefully create a generation of green leaders who design this problem into history books. And the only place we'll see climate change or plastic pollution or water scarcity is in our history books. That would be really, really awesome.
Well, I'm very impressed by what WasteLess is up to, and the fact that you have such incredible outreach to students. I think that's super important. And of course, big shout out to our friends at National Geographic Learning, because they are,
yes,
they walk the walk when it comes to investing in environmental education.
Absolutely. And their new strategy is focused on, the NG Next is focused on education. And they're really seeing how they can tell stories differently and inspire young minds, which is incredible. And we absolutely love your work, John. We're so inspired by the quality and the way of telling stories differently. And I think somehow, Chandrah, we have to include adventure in education programs. We have to do that, because that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't mean that every kid has to go to Antarctica. There's stuff right outside the back door. Yeah. Although if you can go to Antarctica, I'm a big promoter. Yeah.
I want to go. If you need a crewmate, Chandrah and I are really keen.
Nice.
You know, obviously these problems that we're facing are global problems, and none of us on our own, no organization on its own is going to solve these big problems. It takes networking, connections, building relationships and collaborations. And I think it's amazing that we were able to bring you all together today to connect with each other. And everybody who's here, everybody who's watching live, everybody who's watching the recording, if you want to support these projects, if you want to be involved, if you have ideas, if you have inputs, the WasteLess website is in the chat also. We're going to send out an email with all the links to everything, so you don't necessarily have to grab it from the chat. But be in touch with us, AVI USA. We're in touch with WasteLess, and you know, we're happy to be a bridge and make connections. And of course, this work requires funding as well. And I put the link to, if anybody would like to make a donation to WasteLess, that's possible. But you know, all kinds of support is required in order to make this work possible, not just financial, like I said, collaborations, connections, inspirations, ideas, sometimes just sending an email and saying, you guys are amazing, keep it up. That's just as valuable. So
yeah, well, our One Ocean Media Foundation is the funder of all of our work, and we started it so that we can access monies from foundations and individuals as well. So it yeah, there's a variety of ways to figure it out. My luck with National Geographic was through an entity called the Expeditions Council, which no longer exists. They've morphed into other. They've been so successful in selling themselves recently that their coffers are kind of full for right-minded folks.
Before we forget, Yana just reminded me that the narrator of the film, somebody guessed that it was Tilda Swinton. Is that?
It is absolutely correct. Tilda Swinton.
Wow.
I don't know who the guesser was, but congratulations for your successful guess.
That's funny.
Vern was the guesser. So Vern gets 25 extra points that you can cash in at your nearest whatever, your nearest best friend's house for a high five.
At Matthew's house, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so it's been really awesome, really inspiring, really a great opportunity to learn from you all, to connect with you all. I hope that the connection between you guys continues and ripples out into the future. Thanks to everybody who joined, and just thanks to the three of you for your work on behalf of the Earth, on behalf of everybody who, any of us who happen to live on the Earth and who happen to eat the food and drink the water and breathe the air. Thank you for caring for our mother and nurturing our awareness of our interrelationship with her, and for inspiring so many people, young people, old people in all pockets of the world to do the same. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Iona. Thank you, everyone who's watching. And thank you, John. It's been really an inspiration. We hope we'll meet sometime soon. Hopefully, if Matthew calls us back, we'll be stateside soon.
Fantastic. Thanks again, and have a good rest of the Saturday, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.